Hello, I'm Pamela Cucinell. Today that I'm making this recording is June 5th, 2020. And when I look over here, I'm looking at my computer that has all my astrology information on it. So as I'm making this recording, we are headed to a lunar eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius. So I will mention that in the recording, even though by the time it's put up on YouTube, things will have passed. But most of this recording does talk about history. It talks about where we are now. And I will be doing more of this because 2020 is a huge year and it's for support, understanding, and clarity of the times in which we live. So I am going to share my screen and show you a PowerPoint to help me remember what the heck I'm talking about and why. And also, it's how I know where I am in space with what I'm trying to say. This is ideally going to supply you with tools for transformation. What's important to realize about 2020 and beyond is that we have crossed the threshold. We've already crossed it of irrevocable transformation. This has been going on pretty much since Pluto's been in the sign of Capricorn, which began in 2008. It just has ramped up through, you can read about other thoughts I've had on insightoasis.com. There's lots of excellent astrology on the web, so I'm sure you've been seeing lots of information about what's ahead. And these are some of my thoughts about why I still remain optimistic in times that are very unnerving and unsettling. And I love the quote of my friend, the teacher Hasita Nadai, who reminds us that out of chaos comes transformation. And that's simply a law. It's just how things work. So we are in chaos. I doubt anybody would disagree with me on that. And therefore, this is the way we get to transform. So on January 12th of this year, Saturn was in the sign of Capricorn and was conjunct the planet Pluto. So that's up here going on. And astrologers have been looking at this for a while. And of course, one of the things that subsequently came out is that around that time, just actually a few days before, the Washington Post talked about a new virus coming out of China that really needed to be watched. So what the Saturn-Pluto conjunction symbolizes, to distill it down, symbolizes a lot of things, but it symbolizes the destruction of outworn structures to allow new paradigms, new ways of being. So with Saturn and Pluto, it's not unusual that an epidemic occur, and in 1982, it was AIDS. AIDS was an absolutely devastating illness, and its impact led to greater understanding and integration of people with diverse sexual orientations. So once again, sometimes out of really difficult passages, not to diminish people who lost loved ones at this point in time, we can become better. One of the other things that will thread through as I talk about this that happened in the early 80s, of course, was the rise of criminal punishment, which has been a problem in the United States and continues to be, as I'll talk about as we go on. So COVID-19 hit with a force that has changed our world in unprecedented ways, with Jupiter also in Capricorn. When we looked at that earlier chart, it just expands and magnifies the impact of everything. And Jupiter will be coming back or hitting on that point with Pluto throughout the year. And as it does, we can also expect to see increased waves of coronavirus, because that's pretty much one of the roots of what this is about for us. And what it's showing us is that the virus is just a little tiny speck of matter, not even considered a life form, but it has the power to replicate wildly and wreak havoc on a biosystem. And the catchphrase that's come out of this is, "We are all in this together," which is interesting if you're dealing with businesses and trying to see some refund or for things that were canceled or you're unable to do. We are all in this together. And it reminds us, this little virus is bringing home how we're all part of this interconnected web. And we see Earth's response to the diminished human footprint as sea turtles were birthed in amazing numbers, and animals have taken to the streets of deserted downtown areas. Now, Saturn moved into the sign of Aquarius during all this stuff. And wherever Saturn is, we feel limited. We have to reframe or construct in different ways our relationship with that area of life. And it also brings out whatever we're afraid of. So as Saturn was going retrograde, people were hungry to party, explore, and get back to distractions. And yet this is a quick form of connection instead of the deep knowing of the web of existence. And as I'll keep talking, the things that we really have to be aware that we want to eradicate with these lessons this year and going forward is how fear and denial keep us from being the humanity that we could really evolve to be. Now, the other planet that was in that configuration in Capricorn, although not an official planet, a dwarf planet, still astrologers refer to planets, anything that moves in the sky. Back to ancient Greek, the word wanderer, that's where planet comes from. So Ceres, the goddess of the harvest, but she was so much more than that. Her symbolism, as we read her mythology, what she teaches us to be. And a lot of people, when we were first working with Ceres, would say, well, she talks about what feeds us, and that is true. But I think that she also talks about our real hunger, what it is that we need to consume in order to grow and evolve and really obtain our power. A lot of her mythology or stories woven in have to do with how someone individuates and breaks out of the perceived safety net to become her own person, her own, to strive and achieve. So with the Ceres involved in this whole teaching lesson, what we're seeing is a lack of food resources. We should have plenty of food, and there should be food for everyone. Corporate farming, food as commerce, how we burn and destroy food to inflate prices or diminish the power of farming, the integrity of farming. This is all up for not only discussion, but new awareness at this point in time. And then, of course, in contrast to the revelers, we have the protests. This is all blown up, and I will talk more about why now, why it has taken hold. And because, again, of all these configurations, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, the great teacher, wisdom integrator, and Ceres, how do we take care of one another? What feeds us? How do we break through our fears to achieve our true power? So the United States is at a tipping point. People in the streets to protest. And in spite of the danger of the virus, because the phrase that first came out of the mouth of Eric Garner, God knows how many other people who were brutalized to death, and then most recently George Floyd, I can't breathe. So those three words have taken off from just what's happening in the United States, and it's gone global. So throughout countries and communities where people whose skin is not white are taking this mantra and using the power of these viral images to talk about their own grievances. So this is bigger than the United States, as indeed it must be, as our world's gotten so small, which is why the pandemic was able to move with lightning speed, because we fly around, or we used to, and feel as though the world is our neighborhood. So the parallel, I can't breathe. Coronavirus COVID is a respiratory illness that attacks certain people in ways where they cannot breathe. And the lungs of the earth are the rainforests, which we've been destroying in our addiction and hunger for things like palm oil. I can't breathe is a mantra for where is humanity going? Because it's really not so much about saving the earth, it's about are we willing to save humanity? And the only way we're going to save humanity is when we work in tandem with the earth and understand how to make this a collaborative and grateful expression. Right. So the lungs, I can't breathe, are also the heart chakra. And Venus at present is in the sign of Gemini going retrograde. She's been retrograde. So this is all about our coming to new understanding with love, values, and money, to reassess our values. And at first I was thinking, oh, this is all about people being in quarantine and realizing they don't need so much stuff, and we're about to move into a new cycle with Jupiter and Saturn. This all makes perfect sense. But now, with everything that's just blasted open, I've been going deeper, and I realize that the protests are cries for voices of calm and collaboration. That it truly is time, it's beyond time, for human beings to treat one another as human beings with love and respect. And one of the things I've had trouble understanding from the beginning is how to bend the knee, which in my background growing up Roman Catholic, to genuflect, which is a sign of respect and service, how that's been distorted to increase divisions. And now with the protests and asking police to bend a knee, which is a lovely sentiment, but we have to just expand so much more than words, symbolic language. We have to integrate this into our heart chakra. So the divisions in the US have become so extreme that the country, as we have known it, or rather should I say, no, I'll say it as that, as we've known it, must change. As white people have known it, and as Black people and people in color have known it. And it's not the same country, but it must change. And to accelerate the change and allow it to be graceful, we must recognize that any fear or denial that we hold, we have to work on loving and breathing it out, because none of us can hold anger when we breathe, when we truly breathe, when we fill our lungs with breath and we exhale love. Hard to do with the way everything's accelerating now, but this is how we start to restore language and conversation. And I'll be talking more about the astrology momentarily because it's all in the astrology. Nothing I'm saying is telling people what to do other than interpreting what I see in the astrology. So August 20th, 1619 is recognized by many historians and Black historians and people who value having a date. And it's important to have a date. For an astrologer, it gives us something that can anchor and we can understand. But August 20th, 1619 is when the first concrete exchange of a group of slaves, over 20 human beings, were exchanged for food in, ironically, Point Comfort, the site of part of Jamestown. And Jamestown is recognized as being the first established colony that later became the United States. Another point of interest to me as an astrologer is in 1518 was the last time that Pluto and Sagittarius met in the sign of Capricorn. And a lot of focus has been put on the fact that that was the initiation of the Protestant Reformation, when an institution like the Catholic Church, which wielded so much power and money, started to fracture as people wanted to gain a different perspective and ownership of what they felt their faith was. But the other thing that happened was King Charles in Spain decided to open up the trade of slavery to the Americas. So that was in 1518 that slaves were streaming into the Americas from Europe after being stolen from Africa, kidnapped. But the August 20th, 1619 date is the one recognized. And here's the horoscope. So there's a lot to take apart in this horoscope, but the thing that really has intrigued me as I've been digging is, and astrologers will know exactly what I'm talking about, is the South Node at 13 degrees Cancer. So the South Node is basically, let me explain quickly, the nodal axis are points in the sky that basically we see as karmic destiny points. The South Node is where we come from, kind of what we cling to with our fears and our sense of, it's all new and scary to us. And the North Node is where we're striving, what we're working on becoming. So this is an event chart. In a personal horoscope, it tells the astrologer what the individual might need to feel comfortable before they can start to stretch more into their destiny. In a country, very similar. In an event, it's like there are ways in responding and going, but this event actually has planted the seeds of what the United States was to become. And the reaction of the colonists was, oh, good, we can get these slaves to help us build greater security for our home, our food, our resources. Now, also take note of the opposite point, which is the North Node striving to become. That's in the sign of Capricorn, 13 degrees. And right next to it, aligned with it, was the dwarf planet Ceres, even though she wasn't discovered. So there she was, sitting there, talking about what truly feeds a people and the country to be. Not this South Node fantasy about what we thought we needed. The North Node was saying, what truly feeds? Okay, so these are what we call Sabian symbols. They're esoteric phrases, but it's interesting to look at in lieu of this. So 13, 14 degrees Cancer is a very old man facing a vast dark space to the northeast. Where is Jamestown, Washington, D.C., the first 13 colonies? Well, they stretched a little down, but basically the Northeast to the United States. And 13, 14 degrees Capricorn, where we're going. An ancient bas relief carved in granite remains a witness to a long forgotten culture. May it be so. May the day come, and sooner than later, that the way we've been is no longer the way we are. So here's the United States. Our sun, which is how we are to shine, foundation of this country, 13 degrees Cancer. So remember, seeds of Jamestown, South Node in Cancer, right there, shadow in the roots of this country about how we're supposed to shine. So here's why I keep talking about why the United States has to change. Pluto is at 27 degrees Capricorn. We are coming to our Pluto return. The United States is an adolescent country. Look at countries in Europe. Look at countries that have been here for a very long time. They shapeshift, they morph, they change governments around 250 years in, or even sooner, or, you know, and then a few times on, depending on, is this really something that we can keep constructing on? And the Pluto return, which is what the United States is going for, you know, where do we put our wealth, our money, our power? What is it, who is it we are from our deepest expressions? Do we know ourselves dimensionally? Do we know our shadow? Well, certainly Ben Franklin was an astrologer. I mean, Poor Richard's Almanac, he was very much a person who used that information to predict weather, farming, etc. And we believe the founders were aware of astrology when they came up with this time for the United States. What they didn't know, not having been discovered yet, was what was the planet Pluto. They didn't know, not having discovered yet, certain other planetary energies like Neptune, which resides up here. And Neptune, among other things, is a symbol of, yes, it's about Savior, highest octave of love, but it's also about the victim and how people are victimized and slavery. And Neptune is high up in the United States horoscope, and it basically is working with our Mercury that is retrograde. So what stories do we tell ourselves? Neptune's also about fantasy, the illusion, denial. But it's also about imagination, dreams, what we can be, highest expression, as I said, of love. It's a reckoning time for the United States. What kind of country do we want to be? And it's the people who decide what country the United States want to be. And the people are not the same people who were able to bond together and uprise that were in the United States. So the history of the United States and the stories that we tell ourselves, George Washington, Jefferson, Madison, all very wealthy slave owners, had, yes, the euphemism is plantations, but they basically had these slave camps that they could create this vast amount of wealth at relatively young ages. Learned men, intelligent men, deeply flawed men. They could not envision an economy without a slave economy. Men like John Adams, bitterly against slavery. But what they crafted was a document that was looking ahead, a living document is what they called it, looking ahead for what the United States would continue to become. Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, said, don't forget the ladies. Well, the ladies and a third of the country were forgotten, the slaves that were not woven in as having the rights of men. Also, George Washington was aware of the native people in this country and very much was in a quandary about, yes, we should honor these nations, but once again, nothing really crafted in. And if you know your history or want to delve deeper into it, you will discover that all the treaties, everything just is not respected. And unfortunately, or rather tragically, so many people in Navajo and other Indian nations are really suffering from coronavirus, mainly because they don't have access to water, which used to run free and they knew where to find it. When the people of this land more worked with the land, respected the land, saw it as a part of themselves. What kind of country will we become? So this is the time for the George Floyd tragedy. I took this time at the beginning of the the videotape, which I have not watched in its entirety because I saw enough. I don't need to see a man murdered to know that that's what occurred. So at the time that he was taken, which began the event, what do we see? 13 degrees Cancer. So the moon sign in an event chart talks about the mood of the people. And there were people crying for his release. They weren't hurt. The authority figure held on to whatever power high he was getting from that event. But it's the 13 degrees Cancer that I consider critical, that was triggered on that event, because it just, again, conjunct the United States sun, conjunct that south node in the Jamestown chart. What kind of country is the United States going to become? So the lessons that go on the nodal axis now is we've got the nodes have just moved into Gemini, Sagittarius. They've come off the Cancer Capricorn lessons, and I couldn't help but want to look back and see, okay, so when Pluto was at that point, 13, 14 degrees Capricorn, what was happening? So what was happening was in 2013, Black Lives Matter was a response that 3 women reacted to, Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. And so these women reacted to Trayvon Martin's death, murder, in my opinion. They reacted and came up with this hashtag Black Lives Matter. But then that took total fire when Eric Garner and Tamir Rice were murdered. Tamir Rice was 12 years old. And then there's so many names, too many names, way, way too many names that are part of the pain and the power of this movement. In 2015, Say Her Name started to take fire, Sandra Bland. And 2015 was the Charleston 9, gentle people who were killed in their church. So Pluto was at that point. Pluto was at that point where Ceres and the North Node are in the Jamestown, August 20th, 1619 horoscope. When Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, came a voice. So the United States, what kind of country are we going to become? Well, 2020 is such a huge year for many, many reasons. There's also the eclipses that mirror the eclipses that occurred in 2001. And I'm not going to say we're going to see a terrorist event like we did in 2001, but I'm going to talk more about constraints. 2001 brought constraints that actually have also led us to this increased militarized police as license to thwart terrorism, continue to feed arms, training, all kinds of gear to the police that they didn't have before then, surveillance. Now, today, as I'm recording this, as I said, we have the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, and it's where it happens is not exact, but the thing that's important to mention is that Donald Trump, and I know some people react at Donald Trump for lots of reasons. I always hear a lot of yelling from the next room, my husband, about Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is a catalyst, trickster, and I believe a very unhappy man. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at who he is as a person, because what really matters to me as an astrologer in this instance is he is the president of the United States. And he was born actually at the lunar eclipse of Sagittarius Gemini, even though it's not the exact degree of today's June 5th one. But what it's triggering is certainly his eclipse. He gets triggered a lot, but also it's triggering the point of his natal Uranus. And his natal Uranus, of course, is one of the symbols that shows us why he's such an erratic energy. And interestingly enough, that Uranus is on his North Node destiny point. So part of what he's here to do is to be a catalyst. And I think in a very bizarre way, because we needed to have a really like slam against the wall lesson, because people just weren't getting it. I mean, it's honestly inexcusable that in 2020 there still has to be anti-lynching laws constructed. White people have not been paying attention, clearly, and they haven't, you know, their children haven't been educated. There has not been the concern or atonement in this country that needed to happen to truly heal after the exploitation of slaves. So Donald Trump will continue to be triggered. He gets triggered every time there's an eclipse, but I think as of June 5th, all I can say here is that as that Gemini North Node keeps moving towards his sun, is that the lessons that we're here to learn as a world, because the nodal axis affects everyone, is how do we take the wisdom that's around us? How do we take what is our justice system, our legal systems? Because Sagittarius is all about the legal systems, the justice, the authorities that we form that are supposed to be wise based on what we want to create. But it's with the North Node in the sign of Gemini now, it has to learn from the community, the voices, the neighborhood discussions, the organic discussions like hashtag Black Lives Matter that are explaining, informing what creates the wisdom. It's like the wisdom needs to go back to grammar school, kindergarten. And I just, the other thing that comes into my head with North Node and Gemini is I remember that old musical South Pacific that was banned in certain places throughout the United States because when it was written, there's a song in it, and actually one of the themes in it is about prejudice. And the song is, "You've got to be carefully taught." So now that Saturn has moved into Aquarius, we have an opportunity to reshape authority within community. Every privilege carries with it a responsibility. Everybody thinks, oh, you know, this is just mine. It's not just yours. There's a responsibility with it. So to get a little lighter, sort of, the summer solstice is going to be streamed live from Stonehenge this year, which is wonderful. But also know that another eclipse happens on June 21st, and it may take several months to gather momentum, but this is a very strong eclipse energy. Pay attention to what happens in the news at this time. Actually, whenever there's eclipses, pay attention to what's in the news, pay attention to what presents itself to you, symbols, messages, conversations. You might actually have something that happens. These are huge, huge messages that come through, and ideally we take them and we shape them so that we use them as a momentum to get us to another perspective. This particular eclipse is a powerful day to meditate, focus on your attentions, and send vibes for a better world. And if you can gather in a like-minded group, or at least watch this streaming thing, people will be meditating and sending good vibes throughout the planet, I am sure. But we have to realize that this eclipse takes place at 0 degrees Cancer. So it is really activating the global axis. So this year, 2020, as we can already see, is reverberating around the world. Third eclipse of the summer, July 5th. And where does July 5th eclipse fall? 13 degrees Cancer. If you're white and you haven't researched the 1619 project yet, I strongly recommend you do that. The United States needs to roll its sleeves up, revive its history, meet its present, and embrace its future. The only way we do that, the only way we go through the next couple of years that are a revolution, is it going to be a graceful, peaceful, all peoples contributing to the revolution? What kind of revolution is it going to be? And each of us has a responsibility to act in ways that support it. Maybe you're sitting at home. Maybe you're thinking, oh, I can't do anything. I care about all this, but I can't do anything. Oh, yes, you can. Even if it's just $5, you can start donating to bailout movements. You can donate to groups that empower voices that have been disenfranchised. You can write petitions. You can call people. That's if you're in the United States. But if you're not in the United States, as I said earlier, this is a global thing. In the United States, it's very specifically about making atonement of the genocide and slavery and disenfranchising that's been going on for hundreds of years with people of color and Native Americans. That's what's going on for the United States. Other countries, maybe other lessons, other reckonings. And it affects us financially because this eclipse is triggering huge the United States. I would love, love, love to continue to see a building up of nonviolent messages. And the people who control that are each of us, and the people who have their blinders on, it's time to burn them off. The Great Conjunction, that happens in the sign of air. We are already feeling it. We've been feeling it for a while with the devaluing of the manufacturing society. The reality is we're coming off 200 years of valuing earth element products and services. Rise of the Industrial Revolution, glutting of natural resources. All of this is about things, stuff, computers. We every 3 years buy a new one. All that stuff has to change. You can't bring manufacturing back to the United States if manufacturing is just not going to be what most people want anymore. We are moving into 200 years of increased value to services, collaboration, communication, innovation, ideas. When we reflect on when was the last time we saw these transitions coming off the Earth Great Conjunction into the air cycle, that was the plague that went through Europe over quite a long period of time, got rid of 60% of the European population. Devastating. We certainly don't want or need those lessons, hopefully. But after that came the Renaissance. So we are entering into a Renaissance period of innovation and collaboration. And in order to do that, we cannot be so attached to the old ways. It's time to learn. No, people are not objects. There is no way in hell people are property. And that mentality has poisoned a country like the United States. In spite of individuals that don't think that way, it has threaded through the United States. The police came up as an entity, as a power source to control slaves, to control the poor. It's that pedigree has to shift. SpaceX, you can't go to Mars and escape humanity's problems. We'll just bring them to Mars. And Mars is going retrograde September 9th, and will be retrograde for the United States election. And on United States election day, Mercury stations direct, which it did in the year 2000, which many people remember that election. So the volatility that increases as we go into the fall is tremendous. So here's the other thing that I need to mention. On July 5th, Vesta, the asteroid Vesta, is right there at 13 degrees Cancer. Now, Vesta we often see in event charts, goddess of the hearth, when there's fire, things that are explosions. I don't want to predict that for the United States at this point in time, but I will say that the goddess of the hearth is talking about everyone has to be invited. Everyone has to be able to be around the hearth. to have access to food, to clean water, basic comforts. That is who she is. And if she's not heard, it gets very hot. So I'm Pamela Cucinell. This has been my looking at the summer. And I do want to say, I want to remind us again that the virus feeds on fear and denial. And I'm not just talking about the coronavirus. I'm talking about the virus of racism, the virus of making another human being less than. And it's so important that we emphasize respect for all people in work, food, education, and financial reward. And our economy is changing, as I said. It's not going to be based on the same economy. And the United States is still holding on to the belief that a slave labor supports us. So look into companies that get wealthy based on use of prison labor. They might be companies you're invested in or you buy from regularly. Look into who they are. And I suggest, if you value human life, if you value human dignity, if you don't want the United States to continue to be a prison economy, which is basically just spawned off of a slave economy, then be part of the change. Because these viruses are going to be here as long as we need, until we receive the message, until we get it. And it's not an accident that the endemic toxin of prejudice in the United States has come to a head at the same time as COVID-19. It's not an accident. And this is about the very survival of humanity and what is it we want to be as human beings. Let's truly enter the age of Aquarius, which again, it's not all peace and light. Aquarius is about learning how to get the technology in ways that really does accelerate the dignity of people. Otherwise, we're just, remember, the United States has the moon in Aquarius. So we're a lot up here, you know. We have all these ideals that we think we are, that we feel we are. But our sun is in the sign of Cancer, so we're not integrated. We have to work on integrating. And the United States may end up with a totally different birthday. Who knows what we'll become? Because the reality is, if we cannot transform out of this chaos in a way that is a different story than the one we've been living, then we might see more of the fractured states than the United States. Look at your history. Look at other countries. Look at countries that have lived over a couple of 100 years. What happens? And this is where we are. So it's been nice sharing. I will continue to do this. Please let me know what you think. You can find me at insightoasis.com, and that other point, activespirituality.life, is a podcast I do every week with my colleague, Master Healer Susie Mazzoli. So that'll give you an astrology forecast every week and also a little spiritual boost to help you navigate what's ahead. My blessings to you all.